feels so right to go addiction is in direct opposition to understanding the self.
We can quite easily turn our nose up at a homeless person that's found themselves there because of a drug addiction, but to give the person that's at work 3 hours before the start day and 3 hours after the start day huge accolades for being so loyal and meeting KPIs, but not seeing that as an addiction.
Let's dive in to a DM with the universe.
Welcome to a DM with the universe. I'm Hayley Barker.
And I'm Laura Long.
And we are here to talk all things spiritual. Today we're going to focus on a topic that's really apt for this time of the year, in the beginning of the year, and that is addiction. So we were floating some ideas yesterday and I woke up with that in my head today. So I've done some channeling and we're going to talk through that in a deeper way. From my personal perspective, I've got quite an addictive personality. And not so much now, but definitely in the past. If you've read my book, you'll understand that I have had addictions to alcohol, drugs, sex, smoking, and to varying levels and varying degrees. But I think it's really important for us to look at addiction in its broader sense, because we can become fixated on like the things that are maybe illegal or that are things that are very inherently obvious to us. And addiction actually goes a lot deeper than that.
I think it's important to note for those that are new to the podcast, the structure is generally we will use some of your chapters from the book to talk to. But even though we're very new into our podcast, addiction isn't actually a standalone chapter. So what we're going to talk through today, the channeled message, is fresh from the universe. So earlier in my life, I suffered from disordered eating from about 19 until probably in recent years. I starved my body as a control method. So I was quite addicted to being in control of my body. And I think I would say now I'm super aware of my addiction / reliance on my phone, social media, knowing where my phone is, being accessible by my phone. So that's definitely an addiction showing up in the real world today for me.
I think that's one that many people would struggle with.
Yeah, and I think it's really important to add that into the addiction list, because we all think of the top ones, drugs, alcohol, sex, porn, you name them. But I think everyone would probably put their hand up and say that they're a little bit too reliant on their phone. They're a little bit too reliant on picking up that phone when it dings for a new social media notification. And if that's the first thing you do in the morning, I would say that there's slight addiction there.
Definitely.
Yeah, and I think throughout I found when I was in a stressful career, I started using alcohol as an emotional crutch. It didn't get to the point of addiction, but I could see I was self-aware enough to see that that's where the path was leading me. So I stopped drinking about 6 years ago. So I was, having a gin a night just as a download, just as an unwind, that then led into maybe a second glass of gin. And as soon as I was on that path, I was like, slippery path, I'm going to stop here. And just went cold turkey from then.
Yeah. And I think it's interesting, like when I say for myself, having addiction to alcohol or drugs, I never actually saw it as that in those times, because it's socially acceptable, particularly alcohol. So I was the same, stressful job. I grew up in a household that my dad drank regularly. It was just part of our culture, Aussie culture. So I knew no different, that you would always just come home and have a drink. And I would then binge drink on the weekends. So, that was definitely the more of the addiction part of it, but the other part I just saw as normal. But you can definitely step away from that with a bit of space in between and go, I really did use that as an avoidant crutch for myself.
I think that's really important to note, really, when we're talking about addiction, that it's a spectrum, and as soon as there's an emotional reliance on it, to be the life of the party, to have fun, to lighten up, to let go. And if it starts to form a habit, it's addiction.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
But as we sort of have touched on in our own personal conversation this morning, addiction also leads to things that are deemed healthy for us. So exercise is an extreme platform for people to get addicted to, as well as religion and spirituality. Like there are absolutely extremes where that is an addictive influence. So it's not all things that we deem bad for us. There's things that are good for us that can be deemed addictions.
Yeah. Can you go a day or a couple of days in a row without exercise, without controlling the food? Yeah. Oh, that was rhetorical. Like, I know we can, 100%.
I definitely haven't had an addiction to exercise.
I know. Sometimes I wish. Oh, no, actually, I don't. Yeah, can you actually go without doing your morning meditation, and how do you feel about that? So 100% agree. Everyone does think of the negative side of addiction, but it really is just a reliance that you have. So whether that be dressed up as something good or something not so good.
That's right. I mean, you can look at makeup as an addiction, or how we adjust our bodies depending on what you may use, whether that's fillers or things like that. There's so many different ways to look at what an addiction is.
It's a big topic, Hayley. And we might gain some followers, we might lose some followers, but at the end of the day, we truly are just speaking universal truth, and this channeled message supports all of that. So when I read what came through this morning, again, no surprises, but it's such profound information and wisdom. And we did have a little bit of a chat about how we might best share this, because as per all of your channeled messaging, the language can be quite challenging to wrap your head around, and the context in which they speak, it takes a little bit to unpack. So I guess what we're going to do, just as a bit of an outline for those that are listening, is we are going to read through the channeled message, and then as we read, we're going to unpack and talk about how it's relevant to us as a society, as a culture, as an individual.
Yeah, we'll just break and talk about things as we go. So, addiction. This is a fine choice of topic, as it converges across so much of what is at fault or failure in your world. By understanding the causes behind the addictive psychosis that invades your culture at large, you will help many to release themselves outside of their constructed self-imprisonment. This is a marvellous choice. Let us offer this to begin with. In addiction, there are no winners. The only winning advancement is the mirage with which one lends itself to. There are no trajectories out of addiction that lead to an all-encompassing relationship with self, and this is where we shall begin. So I'll read one more paragraph, and then we might just touch on where we're actually beginning. The need to be in relation to self is the foremost powerful and potent expression of human being. It is your birthright to understand the skin in which you stand. There is nothing more powerful or protective to your evolutionary advancement as a human race than that of being deeply, completely, and wholly in relation to self. This is the driver behind all creation and expression in its highest and fullest form. Shall we touch on that for a little bit?
That in itself is such a juicy paragraph. The need to be in relation to self is the foremost powerful and potent expression of human being. And it's your birth to understand the skin in which you're in. Wow. Like, that's just such a beautiful reminder of how perfectly imperfect we are as humans. And it's our role to get really comfortable with who we are.
Yeah. And I think that just speaks to, and we'll go into it in a bit more depth, but when addiction comes into our lives, that sort of just, what's the word I want to use, dilutes our ability to have that relationship to self, because we are so focused on other things filling that space and filling that void. So if we move into the rest of this channeling with the knowledge that the relationship to self is the key to our whole experience here on earth, obviously, we can say, well, having experience and being creative and enjoying what we live in is part of that human expression. But really, it's understanding ourselves in relation to all of those experiences. Otherwise, they're just experiences. If you've got no self-awareness or no self-attachment to those, those experiences, you've learned nothing, or you've felt nothing, or you desire nothing more.
Yeah. Wise words. Yes.
Okay, so we'll get to the next one. So, when one wishes to step aside from their God-given right to create in all manner of wonder, this is where they will find the answer in addiction. It is a formidable force in direct opposition to self-relation. And I just want to stop on that.
Yeah.
Because it is this polarity, duality sort of landscape that we live in, and that makes so much sense to me. It feels so right to go addiction is in direct opposition to understanding the self.
Yep, I had that underlined too. That is addiction in a nutshell. That's exactly what it is. Opposite to self-relation, to that self-acceptance, alignment, embodiment, the opposite.
Absolutely. It sort of just sums it up perfectly in a couple of words. It is an undermining hand that persuades the human of their greatness in truth and gentle alignment. It showcases the individual in their misalignment to self and source.
Yeah, I had that sentence underlined too, because I think that's really important. That misalignment, not accepting, not totally embodying, means that you've disconnected from self. When you disconnect from self, you disconnect from source, spirit, God, whatever the wording.
Absolutely.
I really love that sentence.
Yeah. And that talks so much to the work you do. So I can understand that would really hit with you. What one achieves in an addictive cycle, be it drugs, alcohol, sugar, subservience, sabotage, and the like, is a self-indulgent cataclysm. There is little to be known of the soul in these extreme states. The individual has succumbed to their torrid, mind-altering self-decimation.
Self-indulgent cataclysm. I sat with that and I'm like, what does that mean to me? So that perhaps we might be able to break it down for those listening as well.
It's quite a powerful statement.
It is. And I'm also, the educator in me also is aware that people have different learning styles as well. Some people learn and can take information in by listening. Some people need to read. Some people need to do. So sometimes it's hard when you're hearing something for it to really land. So that's why I really wanted to hit pause on a self-indulgent cataclysm. So when I sat with that, to me, a self-indulgent cataclysm feels like self-absorption. So being excessive indulgent, emotional chaos, and a lack of perspective as well. So allowing your mind to just run with a little blip in life and catastrophizing it.
Yeah. So absolutely to that last piece, because I think for me the fact that cataclysm has been used in a general sense, cataclysmic events, you don't have foresight into those. You don't sort of have that awareness going up to that's about to happen. There's sort of these explosive in the moment situations. So to me that talks about the fact that you're going through these addictive processes or these addictive patterns without that self-awareness or realization that you're actually heading towards a cataclysmic event for yourself.
Yeah. In the soul plan modality that I do, one of the energies really talks about finding your inner peace in an outer world of chaos. And when I read this, I'm like, it feels so connected, and everything is so interconnected. We know that. But emotional chaos is probably something that a lot of people don't really allow themselves to sit with, because it's a foreign concept to me. Chaos, emotional chaos.
Well,
it was.
Well, yeah. Like now I would say no. But I think back to like in my 20s and I would say I had a lot of emotional chaos in my life. I didn't really realize it was that at the time because I'm so separate from that part of my life now in 20 years on. But at the time I thought that was just life. That was gossip. That was the drama that happened in in my own life, but in the lives of others around me. And that was normal. But really, we perpetuate that for ourselves until we know differently.
Yeah. So the next sentence, there is little to be known of the soul when in these extreme states. The individual has succumbed to their torrid, mind-altering self-decimation. There's some very powerful words all lined up in that one sentence.
Yeah, they don't do things in halves, or the energy doesn't.
And I wonder whether now would be a good time to drop back into, because it states here, there is little to be known of the soul. So what we're talking about here is layered. So we're talking about the human in the physical body. We're talking about soul. We're talking about source.
Yeah.
Did you want to give your explanation?
Yeah, that's probably a really good point, just so people understand. In my channeling, and Laura and I have some different words for how things relate, so you'll have to get used to the different way we speak to these things. But when I talk about the self, or when channeling talks about the self, that really is the identity that you are in this body, in this lifetime. So that's your personality. That's what you portray to the world. The soul is the deeper level, the higher level of who you are, and that is, in my belief, the eternal part, and that is an aspect of source. So when we talk about source, we can say source. Some people may say God. Some people may say consciousness. To me, they're all interrelated, but it sort of stems from those three aspects. Source is the top level. Soul is the individual aspect that's come out of the all. And the self is the personality or the suit or the character we're playing in this lifetime to experience consciousness.
Yeah. Good.
So that will explain how the channeling comes through. Laura calls them slightly different things, which we won't confuse you with right now.
Indeed.
An addiction is a prescription from the self to the soul to step aside from life in its fullest potential. It harbours the individual in lack of self-esteem, lack of self-respect, and lack of self-awareness. It feeds into the chaotic mind of self-importance. It hinders the soul from its clear and concise communication with the self.
What I had underlined from that paragraph was the very first sentence, because I think it's great for the logic mind to perhaps cling to. This little bit is an addiction is a prescription from the self to the soul for it to step aside from life, or from its fullest potential. Yeah. So addiction, and this is where you could really unpack. Addiction is popping yourself into lack, into struggle, taking yourself away from living your life to its fullest potential. Yeah, and I think it also, to me, that also speaks to I'm checking out. It's not just you have an addiction because it's a bit of fun or it's smoking. It may distress you in your own mind. We've got all those excuses for the addictions that we have, but really it's about checking out from being fully in contact with who you are. Isn't it ironic when you bring it back to the body, to the self, that a lot of these addictions are an emotional crutch to try and get yourself out of your mind, out of overthinking, judgments, being too overstimulated. But my thoughts, and I'm open to interpretation here, but my thoughts is that it keeps you in your mind. It almost separates you from your heart energy, from your true soul, your true essence. It kind of cuts you off from full embodiment, which I could go on there as to the knock-on effect, not embodying yourself. But it's funny, these are something that we go to get out of our head, but actually it just cements us back into our head. And you then look at some of the long-term effects of alcoholism, drug use. You've got schizophrenia, you've got dementia. There's, people use drugs to get high, to get into that heightened state. And it just completely continues the disassociation. Yeah. To the extreme.
if you take it, if you continue going down that extreme. And you know, let's use phones as an example. Absolute disassociation from society, from socializing, from connection with people. Like so isolating. So that is still keeping you in your head in some way, shape, or form, because you've lost the ability to connect.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's that is why that I really feel like that's quite a punchy sentence. It's a prescription from self to soul. So it's like yourself saying, I'm surrendering my own power.
Yeah. So in addiction, the individual falsifies the outer world by the manipulation of their inner world. I love that sentence. Because it's so true. We create what we want to perceive on the outside, but really we've just altered the inner to have that perception. By overexerting themselves in repetitious fashion, and I'm just going to stop here because I just also want to focus on, I believe in moderation. Absolutely. I think, you know, to some extent, everything's right in moderation, and it's a self-moderation. You know, it's not going to be the same for everyone. But I wanted to just explain that addiction, it's repetitious fashion. So it's a habitual pattern. It's not a one-off thing that you might do. It's when that becomes a formulaic part of your life, whatever that be, whether it's picking up your phone or eating lollies or drinking a drink of wine after work or going to the gym 5 times, you know, a day, whatever that happens to be. So in this sentence, there are also some examples that are given behind each type of impact that addiction has. So I'll just mention those. By overexerting themselves in repetitious fashion around a beacon of hope, such examples are alcohol and drugs. As a self-soother, examples sugar, alcohol. As a self-deflector, work and exercise fall into that category. And or a self-annihilator, so self-sabotage and sinful acts. They invert the introspection of self to an external existence only. Their power is squandered on the deliberation of what occurs outside of themselves in preference to the peace that could be found within. So there's a bit to talk to there. Essentially, the whole message of that is that addiction, it focuses your attention external. And I mean, that's this opposite to self-relation point about what addiction is. Everything that we do, whether we're trying to get out of our minds or get out of a situation that we're in, which is saddening to us. So, you know, from that we use drugs and alcohol because that gives us hope and it makes us feel good in the short term to like step outside of the reality that we're seeing at the time. Self-soothing, definitely alcohol. I think that would be a number one for people to do that. But I think sugar is important as well, and we you know, we see that in movies. You know, the poor single girl that's just lost her boyfriend eating a tub of ice cream. So stereotypical. But you know, there's a reason she's eating a tub of ice cream in those movies, because sugar is, you know, that stimulant to self-soothe. I think a really interesting one for me was the self-deflector, which work and exercise came after. We've both had, you know, we're both perfectionists and we're both workaholic natures, and that really sits with me because I'm not a worker. Sorry, I have a hair in my mouth. I'm not a workaholic any longer, but I was in my 20s and early 30s, and to see that written as self-deflection, I'm like, wow, I never thought of it that way, but it makes so much sense to me now that I really did use that as a barrier to not have to look at myself or to deflect off anything that was really going on at a deeper level in my personal life.
Yeah, I agree. And isn't it ironic that when we both kind of shared what our addictions are, we both know that we've dabbled in very successful corporate careers before this, and isn't it funny how neither of us brought that up as an addiction when 100% it was for both of us, and we know that 100%. Was a lot. So
and it's an addiction for so many in the corporate world, and it perpetuates itself. I'll never forget one day I'd woken up at 3 o'clock in the morning, and the first thing I did was grab my BlackBerry. Is that what they were called?
Mm-hmm.
So long ago. And I went and sat on the toilet and hid in the ensuite for like 20 minutes, half an hour, because I then started just getting addicted and started doing all my emails. And I had people responding to me at the 3 o'clock in the morning, and I'm like, this is why this whole structure needs to be fixed, because I'm sending emails to someone else that's a supplier of mine, and they're responding at 3 o'clock in the morning. That
But
is not right.
Isn't it ironic here that that almost earns a badge of honour as an addiction versus somebody that's totally addicted to drugs or, so.
And a work addiction is an absolutely unhealthy way of being.
It is.
And the work addiction actually fed the drugs in my case, because the drugs were weekend binge party drugs.
Yep.
That were fed by the fact that I worked really hard during the week and I just wanted a complete unwind on the weekends. And so every addiction feeds itself, because ultimately you haven't done the work to have that relationship with self. Correct.
Yeah. It's just quite funny with what society accepts as addiction, though. So we can quite easily turn our nose up at a homeless person that's found themselves there because of a drug addiction, alcohol addiction, whatever, however, but give the person that's at work 3 hours before the start day and 3 hours after the start day huge accolades for being so loyal and meeting KPIs, but not seeing that as an addiction. I'm glad that we're talking about this, because there's a lot of realizations happening, self-realization for me, and I'm sure some of our listeners as well.
Yeah, I really hope so. And I think the self-annihilation is another important one, that ability that we self-sabotage as an addiction, because so many people do that as well without realizing that they're not actually dealing with the emotional situation that they might be in, or that they're allowing themselves to stay in a less than favorable abusive situation, let's say, because they're not wanting to really address themselves within it. So there's so many things that
there's some kind of addicted to, bound by them staying in that disempowered situation.
Absolutely.
I think that's really what it is, because this is the note that I've got alongside of it, is all of this is just some form of disempowerment.
Yeah.
Whether it's self-soother, self-deflector, self-annihilator, all of it. Just total disempowerment.
Yeah. That we've fully controlled and created for ourselves.
A choice. We made the choice.
That's right. Okay, the types of addiction are thick and bountiful. Humans have a keen eye for finding all manner of distraction to satiate their need to feel powerful, in control, beyond themselves, and above all else. They do not realize all the external highs, ! Are readily available within, minus the arduous overtone of a self-destructive demeanour. So that just speaks to how much easier we can attain these feelings of the highs that we do get from some of these addictions if we actually just had that relationship to self and went within. And I absolutely vouch for that, having come from one extreme to the other.
In some sense, it really all comes back to feeling in our body, isn't it? So whether we want to feel more of, or want to feel less of, or a mix of all of that in this cataclysmic, whatever the word is, self-indulgent cataclysm, the chaos of all of that. Being a human is to not want to feel and feel so much more all at the same time, and then trying to control it with addictions. And wow. Yeah. How interesting.
It's a whole mechanism of control, isn't it?
Yeah.
Okay, so the need to avoid the realness of the human soul stems from the collective construct of self-deflection and the self as the sinner. This is inbred into the matrix you find yourselves within and takes courage to alleviate yourself from. You have never been free, in quote marks, from your mind, and therefore you continue to play the game as if having one hand tied behind your back. Would you like to add to that?
How long have we got? Yes, and this truly leads into future episodes about illusion, our reality, the matrix we live in. Are we truly free?
Yeah.
So, yes, that's very important. And I just want to loop back to that very first sentence, the need to avoid the realness of the human. I think really that's what addiction is to avoid that realness, avoid truly being you and showing up as you. So, and are we all in a matrix? We will unpack that in future episodes.
But I think it also, just to touch on that, it's not a get out of jail free because the collective has created this construct and now I'm going to have to live within it and I'm going to abide by the feeling that there's a collective notion there. But the self is the sinner. I just think that's really important because of obviously the religious connotation of that. That as a collective we've created this inner dialogue or this outer dialogue that that we are inherently false. What's the word?
So is that
we are in? Hang on. What is that word? What are we inherently faulted? Faulted with fault. Anyway, something about fault. Go. I'm trying to think of it.
So again, it really feeds back to our perception. So whether it's our perception of self or inherited perception through Christianity, through culture, through gender.
Absolutely. Absolutely. But like you said, we'll do another podcast on that. That's way too big to go into today.
Yeah.
Okay. So now this results in a world ruined by addiction. Shall we say enslaved by the addiction to control the limits under which you mainly function. If you all released your addictive persuasions in unison, you would feel the freedom and warmth of a heart-based human collective embrace. That's lovely.
It is. And it links back to our first episode as well with manifesting and how important it is to really drop that into your heart space and feel that. So I love that this message is really dovetailed off of that as well, about how important it is to show up from our heart center.
Absolutely. The limitations or expectations imposed upon each and every one of you catalyze the ongoing drive for solutions from an addictive foundation. It says, this must stop now. Arrest the need to self-disassociate and embrace the opportunity to form the deepest relationship you can within the earthly vehicle, that with yourself. And that just again speaks to our primal reason for existing in this construct, Earth, planet, wherever. We'll go there another day. But we are here for that complete understanding of self.
And what a privilege it is to have a human body, to be I'm going to say soul in a human body. I don't know that with you. But to embody and to be here in this time in a human body, it's a privilege and it's incredible. Could you imagine all the eye rolling going on with soul family that aren't embodied going, dude, what are you doing? There was a lineup to get to Earth and here you guys are addicted to whatever, disassociating, not being able to self-regulate.
Not playing the game.
Yeah. So I really love that. I really love the opportunity to form the deepest relationship that you can with your earthly vehicle. Okay. Such a privilege to be alive here and now.
Absolutely. So your truth is the exponential factor attributable to break the spellbound climate of addiction. Truth, self-truth, earthly truth, galactic truth, all-knowing truth. This is your guiding light to find the truth behind the existence of it all. I'll go on to the next sentence and then we'll touch on that. Addiction prevents the truth from arising within. Repeat. Addiction prevents the truth from arising within. And this is the whole point of why we have self-relationship, to get to the point where truth is discovered.
Yeah.
And uncovered.
Yeah, and accepted.
Yeah.
Because I think that's the part that may addiction or an unhealthy relationship with something that takes you away from self can happen at all points along that spectrum of, like you were just saying, where it does acceptance, understanding of truth, realizing of truth, accepting of truth.
Yeah. And finding truth being such a personal thing, and without, when you're in those addictive states, you are gauging truth from the external, so there's no self discernment in any of that. And it's sorry, go ahead.
As a whole self therapist, I'll preface this because I know that there are clients that come here that realize a self truth that is trauma with a capital T. Like there's been some big stuff that's happened to them. So I know there are some listeners that'll be listening to this going, okay, so I have an awareness of a truth that's hard, that's big and hard and heavy for me to process in my body, let alone come to accept that it is truth. Yeah. Therefore, that's why they lead. That's why they're addicted to something or some things. So whilst we can talk about this so openly and it's not flippantly at all, I just wanted to, I guess, for the listeners, I really wanted to say to them that I see them in all of this. Some of this is really big. And here we are saying, your truth is the exponential factor attributed to break the spellbound climate of addiction. To show up and see your truth and accept your truth. We know that that's big. And I know a lot of the time it's not something that can be done by self. And I do know that that's why addiction is so prevalent in society, because who do you turn to? How do you get help? It's so much easier sometimes just to disassociate. And secondly, I want to talk to earthly truth, galactic truth, all-knowing truth. So the channeled message went above and beyond just truth and acceptance of self. Now we're also talking about earthly truth, galactic truth. What's your take on all of that?
Well, I think that we can look at it living at this point in time. For anyone that is on a spiritual journey, they'll definitely have a feeling that we are in a time of the world where just knowing our own truth in a very personal sense is just not enough. Mm-hmm. There is so much more coming into us and coming toward us that we need to be fully open to embrace. So that deep relationship with self is so much more than just self-relationship. Yeah, so I'm really happy that came through as well, because to me the epitome of living this earthly human life is to go outside of this earthly human life and understand the all, and to use that as your guiding light. If you feel like you've really done a lot of inner work and you really know who you are and you're quite solid in your personal self, go deeper. There's always more. And that truth is, not in a textbook. Is it?
No, not.
Okay, so just to close out on addiction. Essentially, you are perpetuating your own prison by staying in this limitation. Addiction closes the walls around the world you perceive to be externally engaged with. It becomes smaller and smaller until no such addiction can increase or expand the soul knowing of more, and you fall into the cradle of death. This is the crux of addiction, a lifeless existence. Addiction is the opposite of truth, to self and to expression. Ditch addiction and find your world expand exponentially.
Mm.
And I think the pivotal point for me in that area is that with each addiction, or if we swap out addictions and we fix one addiction and then we just move on to another or another or another, which if you have an addictive sort of trait or personality, that's really easy to do, to land one and think you're sort of all right and then realize in a few months' time that you've picked up another. I think it does crush us into this small box and this small way of living in the end, because we're not able to be free outside of these addictions. The fact that highlights to the point where the soul knowing of more, is when you don't have any desire to know more of who you are or expand in who you are. And that's that thing where you fall into the cradle of death. Now, whether that's physical death, which definitely can be the case for some people, I think it's also the emotional death or the desire for life death. There's so many ways you can look at death in that.
Yeah. I think it's been a really beautiful channel because it kind of highlights that for anybody out there with an addiction to something or to some things, whether it be work, whether it be exercise, whether it be a spiritual pathway. Yeah, it could be drugs, alcohol, porn, but addiction is just showing you where you are out of balance in your life. And it's a space in your life that you're trying to escape from. So the take-home message from me as a whole self therapist would be I'd get really curious there. If you've got an addiction, what are you trying to not feel in your body? So even if, like I said, you're exercising or you're trying to control your body, why? What is it? What's the emotion there? Always seek that emotion and then where you're feeling it in your body. Because I love this, and I love the very wholesome view of what addiction is from a spiritual aspect. But I also know there are going to be a lot of people that receive it and then are asking, so now what? From a very human level, what do we do about it now? Just get really curious. That's curious.
Such good advice. I think the curiosity is key, particularly at the beginning, and you don't have to feel this pressure to rush in and try and go, oh well, I'm not being who I'm here to be if I have all these addictions, and then that creates a whole lot of angst and anxiety within the body. There's no time frame on that. Awareness and acknowledgement are pivotal up front. And I think that curiosity to explore within the self, you've taken the first step to actually want to know the self. Then you're already there.
Yeah, absolutely. And remember, we're a work in progress. We're deeply layered. That's why we're here. You can't kind of address everything all at once. It's a lifelong journey.
Yeah, I just wanted to touch on, because I think talking about the other extreme of like being highly spiritual and totally addicted to that, having done that as well, that really separates you from self as well. You still, the whole intention is that you are here as a human being to experience being a human being. Just completely separate out of that and try and live wholly and solely in this higher state of mind all the time or outside of the body. That's equally damaging. That self-exploration, that self-truth doesn't exist when you're always outside of yourself.
Yeah. And I agree with what you said before about everything being in moderation. It truly isn't healthy to deprive yourself of something just because you had an addiction to it. So, like I said, I haven't drank for however many years it's been. That doesn't mean that every now and again, where it's been appropriate, I haven't toasted something with a glass of champagne. What I mean by that is that I just don't have that urge, or I don't give in to any urges to drown my emotional drama from the day. I don't use alcohol for that. I'll use it as a celebratory or whatever. Yeah,
I think that's really key as well. It's the intention and energy behind partaking in something, whatever that be. That's if you exercise every day with a real joy and freedom in your body, that's very different to I have to go to the gym, I have to lose 10 pounds. Like this really defined sort of angsty way of I can't not do that because I feel less than. Because I don't want to discourage people from exercising. It's not that it's not that I don't exercise. I definitely do, and I do feel really good for it. But I've just never had that addictive drive for exercise, which some people do.
Some people do. Wonderful. Well, have you got anything else to add to that?
No, I think that's a wrap for me.
Thank you so much for channeling that message on addiction. There's a lot to be taken from that. And a lot of, like I said, self-realization moments for myself and aha moments. So, and thanks for also sharing your point of view, because I know that when you channel these messages, not only is it the words that flow from you, but it's also a feeling or a frequency. So it's always really lovely to get your take on the feels, because the words might be landing a little bit differently at times.
Yeah. And particularly for everyone to hear it spoken in different ways from Laura and myself. I hope that you get a sort of a well-rounded understanding of some of the information that comes through.
Yeah.
And I think it's just really important to take that on board for this time of the year. You know, it's a great way to really look into the new year and think about, you know, things that you might want to change for yourself for your own personal development.
Beautiful. Well, thank you.
Thank you. And we will decide on our next topic shortly and be back online next week.
Sounds great. Have a wonderful week, guys. Bye.
See ya. Bye.